there is an alien religion being intruded into the churches. In 1960, 50% of the Christians in the United States belonged to one of the brand name Protestant denominations. Today, that represents 5% rather than 50%. The denominational loyalties are disintegrating, and each of the main denominations are in a struggle with this alien religion. And what is this alien religion? My supervisor at Oxford was a canon and Regis professor. His name was V.A. DeMant, and he points out that you describe religion that the terminology of Christianity is in fact a more serious menace to it than definite unbelief. It represents our undogmatic, unsupernatural, and unevangelical religion. It equates Christianity with good ideals. It attaches no real vital meaning to sin, grace, redemption, or to the church as a divine society. This is something that he wrote in 1947. It was that far ahead. And he is somebody that the Archbishop of Canterbury, Rowan Williams, revered a great deal. So I sent him a Xerox copy of those 2 pages, and he wrote back saying he agreed completely with the fact that this is the great threat, even more than atheism, to Christianity. To lose its transcendence, to lose its concern for sin and grace and the atonement. This is the kind of religion that is being intruded into a church of the creeds, the Nicene Creed, the church of the Chicago Lambeth Quadrilateral, the church that we have received. And that means it has to destroy and replace those beliefs that these bishops who are now doing this have sworn to uphold, but are now intentionally destroying. No less a person than Stanley Fish has disclosed the bankruptcy of this religion. Stanley Fish used to be the head of the English department at Duke University, and he is a virulent non-Christian, but he is the most interesting and unpredictable sort of person. He has been likened to what this lady Paglia says about the feminists. She's a feminist, but she criticizes the feminists. She says, leaving sex to the feminists is like going on a vacation and leaving your dog with a taxidermist. Well, Stanley Fish is rather like that to his fellow liberals. He says very, very refreshing things. And one of the things he says is that the whole liberal claim that it is a neutral thing, it's not a religion, it's not a commitment, it's not a trust, is a shell game. It's every bit a religion, it's every bit a trust, and every bit a decision that people make to believe, to follow this, or if you just take it out of the atmosphere. And it is that human nature is free at its birth. Human nature has reason. You can see this in Ayn Rand, and who has had this remarkable influence on people like the people involved in running our financial, and which she says the only thing you can trust is reason, and you can trust the market without regulation to do the right thing, and the one thing we can all trust is enlightened selfishness. Well, it's just been proven lately, and we've all suffered because that did not work. And we've had a real collapse of our economy because of this false confidence in human reason. What is in jeopardy and is much wiser and much more worth our trust and our commitment is what Archbishop Canterbury said, that we come into this world as children, as babies, and we are the center of the world. And the horizon just depends on where I am. If I move, the horizon moves. And some things happen to me that are pleasant, and I call them good. And some things happen to me that are unpleasant, and I call them bad. So I'm not only the center of the world, but I am the arbiter of what's good and bad and what's right and wrong. And that's a lie. We are living a lie that we are the center of the world. And we are not, and God is. So there's this antagonistic relationship between us and Almighty God, because He is the center of the world. If I were to steal your fountain pen, the world just looks at that as a crime against you. But for a Christian, that fountain pen belongs in God's world to you. So it's not simply a crime against you, it's a rebellion against God. That's true of murder. I'm just trying to create a world in which you don't exist, you see. That's a tussle not just with you, but with Almighty God, see. Now that's a much more worthy, realistic view about who you can trust, whether it's the physicians, whether it's the brokers, whether it's the people that are running Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, or whatever. Human nature it comes into the world in bondage. They're not free. This alien religion comes into Christianity and comes into the churches, destroying the trust that, as W.C. Fields says, trust everybody and cut the cards. He's a much better theologian than lots of the spokesmen for this alien religion. And this self-centeredness with which we are born causes all of the burglary, all of the crimes against persons, all of the embezzlement, all of the litigation, all of the divorce, all of the genocide and the terrorism and the wars in the world. And we lie about it in this alien religion and call that freedom. And Jesus, in the 8th chapter of St. John's Gospel, says, he who sins is a slave to sin. We call he who chooses to sin is free to sin. Jesus says that's a lie. When the Son makes you free, you're free indeed. So that we are in this bondage from which we need to be reborn, baptized. Now that's our religion, and this other thing is intruding into it with the most naive assumptions about human nature. It's right interesting that at Chapel Hill, University of North Carolina, the ex-Christian who was a Christian before he did his graduate work at Princeton in the New Testament, Bart Ehrman, E-R-H-M-A-N, Ehrman, he is head of the religion department and teaches the New Testament at Chapel Hill, and he is not a Christian. So it's rather like getting some Hindu to explain to you Islam. And no one in the academic world thinks there's anything wrong with that, unless it was the Hindu explaining that. But for a non-Christian to explain to us about the Christian faith in the New Testament doesn't seem to be a problem with the kind of idolatry and the apostasy that comes from this, this intrusive religion. The irony of this whole thing is until very recently, there was a man in the sociology department at Chapel Hill. And sociology came out of Durkheim in the 19th century and are virulently anti-Christian, and the sociologists have generally been anything but friends to Christians. But this man's very Christian name is Christian, and his name is Christian Smith. And he is so orthodox and realistic, and he has been publishing so much right there at Chapel Hill. He's now at Notre Dame, but he was right there with Bart Ehrman there. So you had in the religion department a a non-believer, and in the sociology department, a marvelous Christian teacher. He's gotten a recent book, and he quotes a sociologist, the thesis that liberal Protestantism, that's the kind of word for what I'm calling this alien religion, believes in individualism, pluralism, emancipation, tolerance, free critical inquiry, and the authority of personal experience. That has come to so permeate the broader American culture that these values no longer need liberal Protestantism to survive. Smith makes a fascinating point. He argues that young people are no more involved in American religious life because they don't have to be. The values of America's dominant religious outlook for the past century are now carried forward by American culture itself. Smith contends that many emerging adults have brought into an implicit mainline Protestant perspective on the American culture and would be quite comfortable with the kind of liberal faith described by H. Richard Niebuhr, a Yale theologian, way back in 1937, about a God without wrath who brought men without sin into a kingdom without judgment through the administrations of a Christ without a cross. That is what we see as intruding into the churches and destroying the faith and the substance and the structures of Christianity. So that when the bishops of the Fourth Province would not deal with the high priest of this alien religion, this Protestant liberalism that had lost its Reformation roots, Jack Spong, then that's when we decided we needed to have outside intervention, to go to where the Anglican Communion has not absorbed this alien religion, where it is growing and flourishing and is not apostate and is reliable. And that is to the southern, to the global south, where Christianity, especially Anglicanism, is growing, where the Diocese of Nigeria has more Anglicans in it than England and Canada and France and United States and most of the West put together. And so they were willing to answer our cry, come over to Macedonia, and we cannot of ourselves rectify this. We have tried, and we now need outside help. And they did. So we went to Singapore a second time, and Archbishop Collini of Rwanda and Archbishop Moses Tay and I and Alex Dickson and several other bishops consecrated Chuck Murphy and John Rogers to the Anglican mission in America. It's not another denomination, it's not another church, it's a mission society. And all hell broke loose, and people all over the communion, including the Archbishop of Canterbury, and including the people who had developed the Windsor Report, maintained that if we could just stop the litigation on both sides and stop the border crossing, and that the territorial integrity of every diocese is cannot be violated, that would relegate 160 million English-speaking non-Christians to the Episcopal Church's franchise, and that nobody else could go into an Episcopal Church that in the decade of evangelism lost 400,000 people. whereas the Anglican mission in America, and later the development of Cana from Liberia, is planting churches and giving a place for Orthodox Anglicans who are faithful to their theology and their belief and to what they have sworn and what this church has received and the Christian faith, a place to live as Anglicans and be recognized by more than half of all of the primates, representing about 80 to 90% of all the Anglicans. So when there was a call for us to go to Ohio to confirm 110 people who did not want, or parents did not want, the bishop who had gone together with this alien religion to confirm their children, or to be confirmed. So Bishop Wantland and Bishop Benitez and Bishop Dickson and myself and Bishop Cavalcanti of Brazil, 6 of us went up there and confirmed 110 people. Of course, it was not well regarded by the presiding bishop, because we had, on the basis of the gospel and the faith of the church, had violated a canon about going to some other diocese. And I can respect the canon, but the whole canons higher than the faith could hardly be excused from the charge of idolatry. Therefore, they demanded that we be presented, the 5 of us and the bishops who had done this in this church, to be presented before the Council of Advice, which that's the bishop who has been elected to head each of the 9 provinces. And we agreed to appear on 2 conditions. One, that we would be able to deal with doctrine and faith before we deal with canons. And secondly, that we would be able to have outside, objective, non-participating observers too. And we chose David Collins, who had been retired, but he's been president of the House of Deputies, deeply regarded by all right-thinking folks, and Dr. Manning Patillo, one of the outstanding lay leaders in the Episcopal Church and retired president of Oglethorpe University. And he was to be, they were to be the presiding bishop decided to forget it. They were willing to deal with the faith instead of the canons first, but they were not willing to have objective, independent observers. What does this say? But if they can spin it, they'll stay there. But if they can't spin it, they don't want to have this. So it was just quietly dropped, and we were not disciplined in any way yet. The Windsor report made a very bad mistake, in my opinion, by going to the Second Council of Nicaea, which said that there cannot be 2 bishops in one diocese. In other words, you cannot have a bishop, John Rogers, in a diocese in Pittsburgh, and also have another bishop in the Diocese of Pittsburgh. And that would violate the whole Catholic procedure and heritage, which is not a bad idea. It's a good canon. What they overlooked is the fact that at that council, the issue was the 2 heretical groups, the Cathari and the Novatians, had bishops there. There also was a Catholic bishop there. When you have an apostate bishop there, you need to have an Orthodox bishop there. And yet it's characteristic of our times, even on the highest level, including the archbishops of Canterbury. There is a reluctance to deal with the faith, a reluctance to deal with the theology, a reluctance to deal with the trust and the belief that gave birth to the church itself, but then gave birth to the canons. And they're trying to deal with the canons in lieu of dealing with the faith. In order to do this, they say people who do arbitrary things in the Anglican communion without waiting for some consistent are violating what? Instead of saying someone is violating the bonds of faith, the commitment to our common trust, our heritage, the doctrine and the teaching that we were sworn to uphold before an altar, and continue to affirm that. Instead of saying that's been violated, that meaning the faith, they say our bonds of affection. And the bonds of affection, it's a juvenile, adolescent sort of level of things. The church's community does not depend on some emotional thing about how we feel about each other. It is the most bankrupt on the highest levels here, but it hadn't fooled the primates of the Anglican communion. The majority of them know that it's not just the bonds of affection, but it is the bonds of faith, the bonds of our common Christian trust. What is actually being violated is what people call autonomy. Now, autonomy is a synonym for sin. The word means a law unto myself. That's what's wrong with me, is the temptation to be a law unto myself because of myself as sinner. That's what I am to die to in my baptism, and to be raised in my sanctification to God's center and not mine. For a whole province to be given the title of autonomy, you can't even be autonomous in the Rotary Club. If you don't believe in service above self, you got no business being in the Rotary Club. You've given up some autonomous self-law by being in any group, in any fraternity, in any friendship. The very fact that we are friends means that I have to give up some of my autonomy, and we can't have the same chair. And to take this word autonomy, that it's a synonym for sin, and use it as a principle for the Anglican communion, will just not do. The Lord will not bless it.